Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe has begun her 3-day hunger strike, but her husband said today her protest in prison is not just about her lack of medical care, but also in reaction to an attempt by Iranian interrogators to get her to spy on Britain. The mother of one from Hampstead is in jail accused of spying on Iran. With the latest, here's our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
April 2016 and Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe is arrested at Tehran's main international airport. This is footage released by the authorities. The Iranians said she was a British spy. She insisted she wasn't. But now, in a bizarre twist, Mrs Zaghari Ratcliffe has accused the Iranians of asking her to spy for them in return for her freedom.
Just after Christmas, on December 29th, Nazanin was visited in prison by 2 Revolutionary Guard interrogators. They tried to pressure her to become a spy for Iran against the UK, specifically to spy on DFID, Department of International Trade and Development, and an organisation called Small Media, which the Revolutionary Guard keep trying to link her to.
Alongside Richard Ratcliffe today was his wife's boss, the chief executive of a charity. She says the Iranians were recruiting the wrong person.
Although the regime has tried to picture Nazanin as a big spy, I can assure you, as her employer and her colleague, that she's absolutely no spy material. You could recognize that. I've been a journalist for 20 years and I can tell you Nazanin is not.
Mrs Zaghari Ratcliffe has been in jail in Tehran for more than 2.5 years. The couple's daughter, Gabriella, is effectively a prisoner too. She's not allowed to leave the country and lives with her grandparents. Today, her mother started a 3-day hunger strike. She accuses the authorities of refusing her access to specialist doctors to examine lumps in her breast and pains in her neck. The human rights organisation Redress wants the Foreign Office to give her diplomatic protection.
We've been asking the Foreign Office to assert diplomatic protection on Nazanin's behalf for more than a year, and it's a formal legal step whereby the British government would take on Nazanin's claim as their own. So it no longer is just a dispute between Nazanin and the government of Iran, it becomes a dispute between the government of the UK and the government of Iran, which gives a much greater scope for things that could be done to bring about her release, which is the form of reparation that she needs.
Iran has resisted all diplomatic pressure from Britain. Theresa May has met the Iranian president. Richard Ratcliffe has campaigned at the United Nations. But Mrs Zaghari Ratcliffe and her daughter are still trapped in Tehran.
Just after Richard Ratcliffe's press conference this afternoon, he met the Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt. Any progress on the government's attempts to secure her release?
Well, still no decision on whether to grant her diplomatic protection, although the Foreign Office says it is being considered and hasn't been ruled out. But there has been one other development today in that the Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, summoned the Iranian ambassador to demand that she be given access to the health care she needs. Now, there's no guarantee that the Iranians will do that. They haven't given in to any pressure so far. But the Foreign Office clearly thinks there's still merit in continuing to step up the pressure on Tehran. Now, Mrs Zaghari Ratcliffe says she'll refuse to take food for at least 3 days to begin with, possibly longer, partly in protest at that refusal to let her see doctors, but also in protest at that attempt to recruit her as a spy. But it really is her medical condition that's causing most concern, as well as those lumps in her breast. She has numbness in her hands and arms, and not surprisingly, after being in prison for 2.5 years and separated from Gabriella, she suffered from stress and anxiety, panic attacks in prison, but has never been allowed to see the prison psychiatrist.
Simon Harris, thank you. The big Brexit vote is tonight. Will your MP be backing the Prime Minister's deal? Most in the capital will not. Only 9 London politicians say they'll support Theresa May's withdrawal agreement. If she loses and loses big later, what happens next to Brexit and, crucially, to the city's economy and future? Here's our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
The circus was back in town today, the Brexit circus. Protesters from both sides came to Parliament with one aim: to make a racket.
Every time you open your mouth, you're lying.
There was abuse aimed at MPs taking part in television and radio interviews, and a large bell ringing relentlessly to test their sanity. But the MPs weren't drowned out. Instead, they lined up to give the Prime Minister a kicking. Out of the 73 MPs in London, it's thought only 9 will back Mrs May's deal. They're all Conservatives. Even the Labour Brexit cheerleader Kate Hoey thinks no deal is a better deal.
I'll be voting against this deal, which is not a deal taking us out of the European Union, but is leaving us half in, half out.
How are you going to vote tonight?
I'll be voting against the Prime Minister's deal for a simple reason. It is worse than the deal we currently have with the European Union.
It's been difficult. And I've been thinking a lot of it, and I've got quite a bit of criticism for saying for weeks, I don't know, I'm still thinking, and there's still 7 hours to go, but my instincts are I will vote with the Labour whip tonight.
Are you worried about the chaos that will ensue if this deal falls?
Well, I think it's utterly irresponsible of the Prime Minister to hold Parliament and the country to ransom by saying it's either her deal, which is not a good enough deal, or no deal.
It's probably no surprise that Mrs May has failed to convince Labour MPs, but she hasn't won over many of her own either.
It was actually clear back in the summer that this deal would not get through Parliament. We have wasted 6 months from number 10 in flogging a dead horse.
What's your prediction for how Parliament and the country gets out of this mess?
I think the best way is if we can't get this deal through today, that she goes back to Brussels, gets something that will satisfy one or the other side to make sure, and then brings it back, because the EU don't want to leave without a deal.
Let's not throw our hands up in despair. We vote this deal down, we move on, we keep talking with the EU, and we get ready to leave on WTO terms if the EU don't move their position to a more reasonable one.
But some, scared by the prospect of a no-deal Brexit, say the answer is another referendum.
Straight into a people's vote by the end of this week. We don't have time to waste. We are staring no deal potentially in the face.
You don't think voters are sick of the indecision?
I think they probably are, and it's not going to solve if the government's plan goes ahead, because we've got 2 more years of endless arguments about what kind of deal we want with the European Union.
Outside Parliament today, there was little comfort for Mrs May. Inside Parliament, her day's unlikely to get any better.
Well, we're getting ever closer to that vote now. Here's what could happen from here. The so-called meaningful vote on Theresa May's Brexit deal will take place sometime after 7 tonight. Latest thinking is that it'll be sometime after 8, after the amendments. The predictions are still that the Prime Minister will suffer a heavy defeat. If that happens, she will have 3 working days to present an alternative, a Plan B to Parliament, so that would be on Monday. In the meantime, Labour may table a vote of no confidence in her government, which could happen as soon as tomorrow. If nothing changes, Britain will leave the European Union on March the 29th. Let's return to Simon Harris at Westminster. So March the 29th, potentially 10 weeks till we leave the EU. The Prime Minister will be disappointed, won't she, that she hasn't managed to convince the vast majority of London's MPs?
Yes, but let's not forget that the majority of London MPs represent constituencies which voted to remain. Nevertheless, Mrs May might still have hoped that she could have convinced more of them to buy her argument that her deal is a less damaging or the least damaging way of leaving the EU while still respecting the overall result of the referendum. OK, so the 3 Liberal Democrat MPs in London were never going to vote for any kind of Brexit deal, but it's the lack of support on her own benches which is the most telling. Out of all of the London Tory MPs, more than half of them have indicated that they will not support her withdrawal agreement. And that could be very damaging for Mrs May. They include Remainers like Justine Greening and the other MP that we heard speaking earlier there today, we didn't hear today, but was around today, Jo Johnson, both former ministers. Plus, of course, the Brexiteer big beasts like Boris Johnson, Ian Duncan-Smith and Dominic Raab. When it comes to London MPs, Nina, it seems Mrs May is short of friends tonight.
Simon, thank you. Hello, you're watching the ITV News in London. I'm Lucrezia Millerini, and as you've been hearing, it's been a dramatic evening in Westminster and that historic parliamentary defeat for the Prime Minister over her Brexit deal. Well, tonight, London's Mayor Sadiq Khan said the outcome should pave the way for a second referendum, while some of the capital's MPs say this could be the end of Brexit. Well, political correspondent Simon Harris joins me now. Simon, not just the Mayor who's got plenty to say tonight, lots of MPs around the capital have been giving their reaction, haven't they?
Lucrezia, Theresa May represents a constituency from the home counties, Maidenhead in Berkshire. But if she was hoping for the support of fellow MPs from this part of the world, she was wrong. No fewer than 30 Conservative MPs from London and the home counties voted against her withdrawal bill. The most prominent, of course, the former London Mayor and Brexit cheerleader and champion Boris Johnson.
Everybody in this place voted to, or virtually everybody voted to trigger Article 50. The overwhelming majority of people voted in favour of the referendum. The referendum was a convincing vote to leave the EU, and our duty is to make sure that that happens. And that's what the Prime Minister said again tonight so passionately.
Mrs May said she wants to reach out to MPs from other parties to find a way forward. But tomorrow, Labour will propose a motion of no confidence in her government, and the party's MPs in London are in no mood to be conciliatory.
If you lose by this massive margin a deal that you've been negotiating for 2.5 years, that you delayed, and of course it's right that there is a vote of no confidence, and we can really see if this is the Prime Minister that is to lead us forward for any longer. So that must take place tomorrow.
London's 3 Liberal Democrat MPs were never going to back any Brexit deal, and sure enough, they didn't.
It's a shattering defeat for the government, far worse than anybody predicted. I think it is the beginning of the end of Brexit. The Prime Minister's talked about all-party talks, and I think unless she's willing to look at the idea of going back to the people and testing out her plan against remaining in the European Union, I can't see any movement.
This was a historic defeat for the government, but it might also be remembered for the shocking image of a heavily pregnant Labour MP being wheeled into the chamber. Tulip Siddiq, the Labour MP for Hampstead and Kilburn, postponed her caesarean to take part in the vote. In the end, it probably wasn't necessary.
Important day, though, Simon. All hands on deck. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. We will, of course, be here with the latest from what looks set to be another very busy day in Westminster on the ITV News at London tomorrow night at 6. And in just a few moments, we'll be speaking to 2 neighbours divided by Brexit to see if their views have changed. Let's take you back to Westminster now and rejoin Simon Harris. Another big night for Britain. Take us through the timings.
Well, unlike last night's vote, this is a very straightforward one with no amendments. A simple motion. This House has no confidence in Her Majesty's government. And after 6 hours of debate at 7 o'clock this evening, MPs will file through the division chambers, and we should know the result around about 7:50. If Mrs May's government survives, we expect her to start work on her Plan B tomorrow, beginning her talks with other parties to see if she can find any common ground which might lead to a revised withdrawal agreement which a majority of MPs can sign up to.
Simon, on a political and personal note, once again, Tulip Siddiq, the MP, was so keen to vote this evening, she has delayed the birth of her baby.
Yes, last night we saw the MP for Hampstead and Kilburn, who's in an advanced stage of her pregnancy, being brought into the Commons chamber in a wheelchair so she could record her vote. Now, there was a big row with MPs on both sides saying, was it really necessary? Couldn't she have been paired with another MP so she didn't have to make the journey? Well, tonight she's again travelled to Parliament, having again postponed her caesarean. But tonight she says she's received a personal assurance from the Prime Minister that she won't have to be in the chamber itself. So long as the whips have checked that she's physically in the precincts of Parliament, her vote will be recorded in a process known as nodding through. And all being well, the new baby will be delivered tomorrow.
Simon Harris, thank you. First, Theresa May faced a vote on her Brexit deal. Now she faces a vote of no confidence in her government. London's MPs were overwhelmingly against her withdrawal agreement last night. But will they support her tonight? We are just over an hour away from yet another big moment at Westminster. Our political correspondent Simon Harris is there. Simon?
Nina, last night almost 30 Conservative MPs from London and the home counties joined forces with opposition parties to torpedo Mrs May's Brexit deal. But such is politics. Yesterday's enemies are tonight's bezies. And tonight, those rebel Tory MPs are back on message. For one night only, maybe, but certainly long enough to stop Jeremy Corbyn triggering a general election. At least that's what everyone expects to happen. Westminster seemed subdued today, on the outside at least. After the high drama of last night's monumental government defeat, only the hardiest of protesters braved the drizzle.
Mr Jeremy Corbyn.
But inside the Commons, passions and tempers were heating up as MPs debated Jeremy Corbyn's motion of no confidence.
And isn't he simply trying to disguise the fact that on this great issue, he has no policy?
This Frankenstein deal is now officially dead. and the Prime Minister is trying to blame absolutely everybody else.
What he's done to his party is a national tragedy. What he would do to our country would be a national calamity.
This looks like more of a strategy to divide and conquer.
Brexit suddenly seemed like a side issue as the Prime Minister's competence was questioned and defended.
It would be infinitely better for this country to have the continued leadership of a Prime Minister that has the experience of negotiating so far.
Surely it is now time to act with humility and to do the right and honourable thing and to resign and call a general election.
Labour is not a government in waiting. It is an opposition in hiding.
But what about Brexit and the way forward? MPs are as divided as ever.
So far she's been adamant that it was either her deal or no deal. I hope they have been doing some homework because clearly her deal went down in flames.
She needs to go back to the drawing board. This has just been a catalogue of errors from start to finish. The fact that she triggered Article 50 with no plan.
We're going to have to vote for something after a while, and I think that for something will be allowing people to make their own choice.
It's a very simple solution. Gridlock in Parliament, you've got to refer it back to the people.
But before the Prime Minister can reveal her plan B, she must first survive tonight's confidence vote. With the Tory rebels now back on side, it should be a formality. But these are strange times in Parliament. Simon Harris, ITV News, Westminster.
Now, after a week of twists and turns at Westminster, we are still no closer to knowing what Brexit will look like when we leave in March. For many people here in the capital, the growing uncertainty is beginning to have a serious impact, not just on businesses or the housing market, but on sports clubs too. From prestigious polo teams to grassroots rugby clubs, many depend on EU nationals to survive. And as our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
There are a few posher sports, but away from the polo field, glamour is in short supply. Ham Polo Club in Richmond is the only one in London. For the grooms looking after the horses, it's a labour of love. Even out of season, the days are long.
After mucking out, we're going to take them for exercise, which is we're going around the club. Sometimes we're going to the park to make them exercise nice in the park.
Lucas is from the Czech Republic. Ham Polo Club relies on a large number of grooms from Eastern Europe and is now having to plan for a no-deal Brexit.
We know that if we lose our Eastern European grooms, we do have British grooms, but we have a large number of European grooms, particularly from, I think, the Czech Republic and one or two from Poland, maybe. Yes, it will not be easy for us, but we're not fret. We're going to take it on the chin and make sure we can deal with it. So we are planning for things if they do go in the wrong direction, but we're hopeful they won't.
Polo might be regarded as a niche sport with an exclusive fan base, but it has its place in London's sporting ecosystem. Like many sports, it attracts money and generates money.
Sport plays a really important part in our economy. A lot of people are employed in the sector. It brings a lot of people, particularly to London. You know, we've seen some fantastic events being hosted here. We want to attract people from all over the world, including the EU, to come and visit to support. When they come, they spend money in our city. They stay in our hotels.
Not far from the Polo Club on a cold Wednesday night, members of London French Rugby Club are training.
You can do two steps and offload the ball.
London French was founded 60 years ago. Not all of the players are French, but since the referendum, membership has fallen from around 60 to 20.
We used to have two teams. Now we're playing with only one team. And having all the friends going back to France or elsewhere in Europe, it's always sad, and the mood is not, the momentum we had is not as strong as it used to be.
The attractiveness of London is reducing. You know, when we realize that the sterling currency lost nearly 30% of its value against euro and other currency, it means that even for young people who want to move and join, a new job in London, actually the attractiveness of those positions is getting reduced significantly.
For London French, the real Brexit fallout may have been on the pitch. Since the pool of players got smaller, inevitably perhaps the club has been demoted.
And Simon will be discussing all that and more on the Late Debate tonight. Here's what's coming up.
On the Late Debate this evening, we'll be asking where now for Brexit. Joining me in the studio, the Essex MP Mark Francois, a passionate pro-Brexiteer who's not scared of no deal. Wes Streeting, the Ilford MP who wants a second referendum, and Baroness Jenny Jones, the Green Party's only peer and an unlikely supporter of Leave. We'll try to test Theresa May's theory that common ground can be found. And we'll be joined by another second referendum supporter, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. To find out what they all think, join me for the late debate here on ITV at 11:15.